Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Severe Setup. For those to break the fourth wall immediately, I just pressed restart recording as I completely destroyed the opening for this one. As you can tell, I am on the wrong side of the screen yet again. I am without my faithful leader, Mr. Ian O'Neill, sitting in the hot chair, doing the hosting, which is actually the difficult job of this whole podcasting thing. Because Ian is away, he is on work duties this week. I am joined by MMA writer extraordinaire and general relationship man inside the MMAs, Mr. Spencer Kite. Sir, how is it going?
Wonderful. It is a pleasure to be here. It is an honor to fill in for the great Ian O'Neill. It's a joy to talk to you about fights and have Hux hanging out in the background. It's been too long since we did this. It's so much fun.
Well, we will dive straight in. We are talking about UFC 301 today, headlined by Alexandre Pantoja and SevereMMA, propped up by a scaffold of fights underneath them. Jonathan Martinez, Jose Aldo, Anthony Smith, Vitor Petrino, Michel Pereira versus Team Sheehan, Michel Pereira versus Iho Pretoria, Paul Craig versus Kyle Bahayo to round us out for that main card, and then a grip of fights, if I was Spencer Kite, on the undercard there. Let's just talk just a little as we move to our next pay-per-view off of UFC 300. What are your sort of feelings coming into 301? Personally, I'll just add mine. Personally, obviously 300 was a monumental event, just fantastic on paper, fantastic in practice as well. I'm pretty interested in lots and lots of these fights on 301. I feel like it is a nice sort of segue from 300 back to maybe your more rational, if you will, pay-per-views, where obviously 300 was pull almost all of the stops out other than, main events, whatever. Whereas this one, if you told me that we'd get Pantoja, Aldo, Urseg, etc. on a card, it's going to be a pay-per-view. You know what I mean? Like more often than not, it's going to be a pay-per-view. Do you have any specific feelings coming into this card? Any relations with UFC 300?
Not necessarily with UFC 300. I do think it is sort of a reset card after that historic event. Like, nothing is going to measure up to that the rest of this year. And if it does, we're spoiled and it's wonderful. I love these sorts of events. I love international pay-per-views because, this card is 14 sets of fights or 13 sets of fights where it's Brazil versus somebody else. So from the very first fight of the night, there's going to be a packed house in Rio cheering on the Brazilian side, so in the first fight, Alessandro Costa, and telling the individual on the other side, in this case, Kevin Borjas, you're going to die. And it's going to continue for 13 or 14 fights. And I'm going to love every single minute of it. Now, there are lots of people that go, I don't know half of these people. How is this a pay-per-view? And as always, I am here to tell them, settle down. This one is not designed in terms of matchmaking, in terms of the composition of it, necessarily for you. It's designed for the 20,000 people that are going to pack Farmacia Arena on Saturday in Rio and go absolutely ballistic because they have watched every regional fight of Alessandro Costa and Ismael Bonfim and Diani Barbosa and all of these other fighters that we may not know in North America or in your case in Europe, but they do. And it's more for them. But I will also say, settle in and enjoy it because there's some people you should be paying attention to that are going to be factors in their respective divisions going forward. And you are going to hear from more in the back half of this year and on into the future. So just enjoy it.
Well, the lion's share of what people have been discussing, obviously, is this main event. A slightly interesting coming together of a fight, if you will. I think Steve Urseg obviously looks great in his last performance, but I don't think anyone was clamoring to see him immediately vaulted into a title shot now. He's come into the UFC with not a huge amount of time left on his physical clock. He's already in his 30s. At flyweight, we know that is, we're sort of, he's not in his 30s. Am I chatting
20, He's 27. He'll be 28 in July.
okay, then I'm just thinking about a completely different fight.
To be fair, he looks like he could be 35.
Sure.
And an accountant.
But here we are. Alexandre Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. My immediate thoughts are fantastic fight. Massive step up for Steve Erceg in terms of intensity that somebody like Pantoja brings, the intentionality of somebody like Pantoja, the cardio, the gas tank, the willingness to fight wherever it goes, the sort of what's the word that I'm looking for? Like when I think about Pantoja, I think about a fucking Tasmanian devil. You know what I mean? Like he is just a whirlwind from start to finish. He's very tough, very durable, hits very hard. Grappling is always fantastic to watch. And we haven't seen Steve Erceg tested in some of those areas, right? Is that because he's so good that fighters haven't been able to get him there? Possibly. Is it that just in the UFC, we haven't seen him go up against the elite of the elite competition? Maybe. In this fight, he is undoubtedly going to face elite level competition in Alexandre Pantoja in the belly of Brazil immediately after the King of Rio. And look, from a storylines perspective, if Jose Aldo comes out here, it doesn't matter how he looks. If he wins, if he gets his hand raised against Jonathan Martinez, you best believe that the belly of that arena is going to be at a palpable decibel level. Thoughts immediately on this fight?
So if Jose Aldo wins, he will run out into the crowd and celebrate, and then probably announce his retirement would be my guess. And then after that, the kid that grew up poor in Copacabana is going to walk out holding the UFC flyweight title and be like, I know the King of Rio was just here. The Prince is back too. Let's go. And that place is going to be electric. I adore this fight. These are the kinds of matchups that you know personally from previous experience I advocate for all the time. You don't have to be number one to fight for the title. You don't even have to be number 2 or 3. In this case, Steve Erceg is 7, I believe. But the timing is right for him to get an opportunity, because I didn't need to see Brandon Royval hustled back in there right away after beating Brandon Moreno earlier this year. Now, if Brandon Moreno had won that fight, I think they probably do Brandon Moreno. Pantoja was there in Mexico City when that fight happened. And I think if Brandon Moreno had won at home and we get a big pop and we get a big roar, Moreno says, okay, Pantoja, let's do this one more time. Pantoja comes into the cage and away we go. That didn't line up. This also could have been Manel Cape had he made weight in January, but he didn't. And so Steve Erceg is the right choice, and he gets an opportunity. We don't know a ton about him in terms of experience in the UFC, only 3 fights so far. We're going to find out a lot about him on Saturday. And I think this is going to be one of those fights where he's going to open some eyes. He's going to show a lot of people, you didn't know me then, you know me now, and I'm not going anywhere. This feels, I talked to Eric Nixick for the coach conversation about this fight, and he compared it to Diego Lopez's short notice debut against Movsar Evloev. He rolled into that fight. A lot of people had never heard of him, never seen what he could do, rolls in against a top 10 guy and gives him hell, loses the fight, but everybody came away going, don't care what the result was, that guy. Now we see where he is. I think this can be similar. I also think Steve Erceg has a chance to win this fight.
I think it would be silly to say that Steve Erceg has no chance to win this fight, for sure. But I also feel as though we are, to your point, to me personally, I would like to have a few more questions answered before we chuck a fella into a title shot.
Sure.
But I have no problem, and I will not be clamoring from any rooftops saying that somebody should be in this spot ahead of him, other than maybe a Muhammad Bakayev, right? But whatever, he will get his shot undoubtedly. What I do find, and the one big question, the one big wrinkle that I would like answered in this fight is the grappling. Steve Erceg has really good head movement, really, really clean footwork, has good range control, can hit hard, can crack, really nice left hook on him, and some good fundamental MMA boxing. What else? You know, that's the interesting thing to me, is what else? Because we know and we have seen over Pantoja's illustrious career in the UFC that he can do it all. He can. He's been there. We've seen it. And he's had, 2 areas of his career. In the last little while, he's really peaked, obviously, by winning the title and by looking fantastic when he did so. And so Pantoja in the belly of Brazil, main event, big card, Jose Aldo underneath him, some fella from Australia that he's going to feel like, I know in all the press conferences and all that stuff, he said, I'm not overlooking this guy. I know how good he is. I know how this, I know how that. There's going to be an element where he does look at those divisional rankings and he says, number 7 on these rankings, maybe he doesn't deserve to be in here with me, blah, 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 blah. He's going to want to put on a show. He's going to want to put on a show. And what does that do for Pantoja? Does that allow him to bring out the demon in him that jumps on a mic and screams, "Dad, are you proud of me now?" Which is one of the most electric moments in the last 10 years of MMA? Or does it allow an essence of complacency to kick in? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I really, really don't know.
That is the chief question I have for Saturday. I would like to see the Pantoja that fought Alex Perez. I would like to see the guy that comes out with a little more urgency, that comes out a little more aggressive. I think he is at his best when he is attacking and just has that pinch of wildness, just has that pinch of crazy in there. I have talked with his coach, Marco Stamata, a bunch of times. We've talked about, hey, what's it like trying to rein this guy in a little bit? And he says, we got to tell him all the time, like, hey, settle down. Like, ease up. We got 25 minutes to work here. You can't just be out there all gas, all gas, all gas. I got a feeling homecoming, we might get a little bit more gas out of Pantoja early in this one. Just even if just to check Steve Erceg right out of the gate, even if just to see, hey man, are you ready for this? Like, I've treated you like you're ready for this. I'm coming in fully prepared, taking you as a legitimate contender. But let me just see what happens now that you've walked out here and you've spent all week down here where every single person you've encountered is cursing you out and telling you you're going to lose and has no interest in seeing you. And you're on the other side of the world. And it's my hometown, literally where I grew up. And I get to have this homecoming. Let me just see in these first 90 seconds what kind of metal you got, what your insides are made of. And I think we will see it. I think the last couple of fights for Pantoja, he has been really smart. He has been tactical. He has played to his strengths as best as he can. And he hasn't been as aggressive in looking for finishes as he's been at different points in his career. Obviously, the competition is better. The stakes are higher. It makes complete sense. This isn't Brandon Moreno. This isn't Brandon Royval. Now, Steve Erceg may show us that he's on that level. I got a feeling we see Pantoja come out to start and say, let me just see where you stand and come after you like it came after Alex Perez and show you zero respect and just take it to you and see what you do. And then we'll see from there.
I have a feeling of the same, but I have a feeling that Steve Erceg is going to stand there and say, okay, big man.
Yeah, me too.
Come on then.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to make me really excited. Yeah,
but it leaves Pantoja in an interesting position where if you burn a significant amount of gas in 90 seconds, and this is again the thing, like adrenaline dumps are obviously a real thing, and I know that Pantoja is obviously a very seasoned competitor, over 30 fights, and Steve Erceg also a seasoned competitor, specifically in professional MMA, but that room is going to do something to you, and it will do something to Steve Erceg, of course, but the weight of his entire history, his personal life history, hangs on him as he walks through the belly of that arena with a Brazil flag lofted above his head. It does something to you. And the expectation that is placed upon you by everyone that you know in Rio, everyone that you know in the country, everyone that you know is watching around that country, around the world there for you. It could look like I know that we hark on about this all the time, but that first London card a couple of years ago where everything built perfectly, just went and went and went. And by the time that Tom Aspinall walked out, the crowd was absolutely bananas. And we could be looking at a very, very similar thing here. And that can do something to a man. It can send Pantoja into, and I wanted to sort of touch on this, is you mentioned about the craziness. Like, something that we talk about with Johnny Walker and Michel Pereira is being able to balance the crazy. And Pantoja, I think, in that block of fights where he just ran through fellas, managed to find the balance of the crazy, where it was beautiful and it was wild, but it was controlled wildness. He knew when to pull the trigger. He knew when to let the valve off just a touch. He knew how many turns on the valve he needed, right? And he just cranked them up and off he went. And I feel like Steve Erceg has a lot to offer, potentially, right? I also know that he's never been in a fight like he's about to be in on Saturday night. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, you mentioned the Brazil thing again, tying it to coach conversation. It's Eric's X factor for this fight, and it plays on every side in all kinds of different ways. And we're not going to know how it impacts, what it does, because as much as this could play like that first London card back, where it all just builds properly, and for the most part, say for Mike Grundy, everybody got a win, and we were just crescendo. Could also play like Toronto did in January, where we lost. And shout out to the ladies who got their victories, but it just wasn't that kind of night. And then we got to Mike Malott and we were like, okay, Mike will get one. Nope. And so there's that too, right? Like, you may be, we don't know what it's going to be. And this is Brazil against everybody. So we could be out there and it's, we've only had 3 Brazilian winners all night, and then there's some pressure. And what if it's, the downside of Jose Aldo just lost and everybody's sad, and now it's on you, hometown boy, give us something to cheer about. Well, that's a whole different kind of pressure. That's a whole different, it's going to be amazing. I cannot wait. Please go read the coach conversation on UFC.com.
The King of Rio is back. 37 years old, retired once. Hall of Fame. One of the most beautiful entrances to the Hall of Fame that we've seen. Couldn't resist, obviously, couldn't resist coming back for his 40th MMA fight. Right? Picks up Jonathan Martinez in the co-main event. I think the big question for me here is, what has Jose Aldo been doing between his last fight and now? Was he still in the gym? Was he still ticking over? Was he still relatively active? Or was he off enjoying his family, enjoying his life, enjoying the fruits of his labor? If it was the former, I think we have a very, very competitive performance coming against Jonathan Martinez. If he's been out of the gym for the months leading up to this fight, chucked himself back in because he knew Rio was coming, gets himself in shape, etc. Because that's the other thing, is the weight cut, right? We could see a very sad performance. However, and I'll add a third variable before I chuck it over to you. If Jose Aldo wants to go out on 40 fights, right, a clean 40, and he knows that this is his last one, boy, oh boy. Boy, oh boy. He will get the reception of a king when he walks out on Saturday night. And that, regardless, every other fighter could have been brutally knocked out inside a minute. When Jose Aldo's theme song hits those speakers, it's party time. Thoughts?
It is my number one all-time favorite walkout, in part because he started using it in Sacramento, California, when he defended his WEC title against Uriah Faber in the hometown of Uriah Faber. So Faber bops out to California Love, as he always does. It's a huge pop at home. And Aldo says, okay, just a reminder here before we get started. Maybe your town. I run this town. And then he went out and ran that town. I was very honored to get to write the Hall of Fame piece on Jose Aldo. He is one of those guys that just has moments throughout his career that I can tie my career to that, you know, I was at UFC 129. It was special. He's special. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little unsure as to why we're doing this. You asked, what has he been doing? Well, he boxed a couple of times in 2023. I have a sense. I was asked to write a piece for Fighters Only that will come out at the start of May about what does this fight mean and what's his legacy and all of this stuff and what are your thoughts on future. And my thought is this is a one-off. My thought is Jose Aldo is the kind of athlete whose career shouldn't end in Salt Lake City, Utah against Merab Dvalishvili in a fight that is kind of tepid for the most part. Just a lot of clutching and stalling and grinding and nothing from Jose Aldo really. And that's with all due respect to the fine folks of Salt Lake City, Utah. He deserves a send-off like this. And so I think he's coming to try to wrap this thing up in glorious. Win or lose, this fight ends. It's just about Jose Aldo, I think. Gloves come off, puts them down, cry, have a moment. Everybody up. It'll be great. It'll be even better if it's off a win, because I don't think he's the type that's going to get sucked in where, well, I just beat Jonathan Martinez. I think he's ready to go. I think he wants to have a moment. I just don't want to have the sad moment. And I'm real worried that we're going to have the sad moment. Because I tell you what, Jonathan Martinez is quiet, unassuming. You ain't heard him say a word his entire career, but that dude is a motherfucking killer. And he is really good. And against a 37-year-old Jose Aldo that hasn't stepped into the octagon in a year and a half. Remember how we used to love that Jose Aldo bashed people with leg kicks? Guess what's happening on Saturday? The evolution is coming, and it's leg kick, leg kick, leg kick, body. Leg kick, body. Body, head, leg kick. Here's my left leg over and over and over. Now, if we get dialed in Jose Aldo, and he is ready for action, and he is loaded up, ready to go, this is going to be really goddamn fun. And I'm going to sit right where I am now, staring at the TV in front of me, smiling, probably shedding some tears, and just loving life. I just don't want to be sad when it's over.
I think that's a beautiful summation. And with that rapturous inflation, I'm going to offer you Anthony Smith versus Vitor Petrino. Personally, I don't know why we need to see Anthony Smith fight anymore. I have said this for the last 3 fights that we have covered for Anthony Smith. I think I understand completely that giving up the athletic career is something that is really, really, really difficult. I completely understand. However, it's often very difficult because there is nothing in combat sports that is keeping you there, right? There's no coaching role. There's no advisory role. There's no consultancy role. There's no coaching, management role or anything like this. Anthony Smith has a job with the UFC. Now, of course, that's not guaranteed, right? That at any time, that job can just disappear. Of course, such is the nature of things. But he is good at the job that he does, right? He is always going to be improving with the people he has around him. And I just don't quite understand why we need to do this now. If I was Anthony Smith and somebody said, would you like to watch the potential final fight of Jose Aldo in Rio and hear the pop of the crowd live? Yeah, sure, I'd give that a go. But he's going to be warming up, right? He's going to be getting ready. It's not going to be the thing that he wants. And Vitor Petrino is okay, not a fantastic fighter, but is a very good athlete, hits quite hard, and can do a little bit of everything. And this feels to me as though this is a what do you call that in wrestling? When you put one guy, you put a guy over
a squash match.
I mean, sure, possibly that.
Yeah, it's a setup, right? This is positioned to be a setup. This is positioned to be the veteran guy comes down and the young Brazilian goes over and looks good and picks up his 5th win in 15 months in the UFC. And we can keep talking about him as a rising star in this division. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it necessarily goes that way because Vitor Petrino, for as successful as he's been, is still very green, still learning. But Anthony Smith has had 50 some odd fights. He is 36 years old. Father time beats everybody.
It does.
As you said about the Jose Aldo thing, and it made me smile because if he wasn't fighting, he might be there for ESPN anyways, where you could actually sit and enjoy it and embrace it and just revel in it because he's a very good analyst. I don't always agree with everything he says, but he's a very good analyst. He's great at what he does. Last time we saw him was Khalil Roundtree with a hammer of God ready to come down. Now you're going to fight another young bull that's fighting at home and wants the opportunity to show out and get this opportunity to go over on a ranked guy and keep rising through the ranks.
It's dangerous.
It's tricky. And the trickier part here is it'll be even harder to walk away if you win. It'll be even harder to go, all right, I got to go. If you go out and have, because if I recall correctly, Anthony Smith won his fight before Khalil Roundtree to snap a two. Right. Beat Ryan Spann in the unnecessary rematch of all time over in Singapore and went, hey, I'm back. I'm good. I just beat Ryan Spann. He's a ranked dude. And then Khalil Roundtree clobbered him. I was ready to see him go a couple of fights ago. That being said, I was ready to see him go when he had his last 3 losses in 4 fight stretch. And then he won a couple. And so it convinces you that you can stick around. We'll see what happens after this one.
From one squash match to another. Michelle Bahia versus Angel Pretoria. Like, I honestly, this is not the case at all because it's not this calculated. But this to me is Angel Pretoria treats Shogun Rua as he treated him. And then they're like, Michelle Bahia looks really good at 185.
So I wrote about that in the fight by fight preview saying, not that I think that's what it is, because Ihor Pretoria steps in here for Mahmoud Muradov, who's forced to withdraw. Pretoria was already in camp preparing for Share a Bullet. And so we come over and we make this fight. However,
the gods,
the crowd in Rio sure as shit doesn't forget that last January you sent our hero Mauricio Shogun Rua off to retirement and did your little duelist thing when you should have gone to your corner, gotten down on your knees, and just sat there and done nothing until that man got up and got applauded and got cheered and all of those things and made it all about him, right? We said after the Jose Aldo fight, regardless of what happens, it's going to be all about Jose Aldo. Hey, Ihor Pretoria, that fight with Shogun Rua wasn't about you, son. Don't do any of that stuff. And now you're going to be there. And Michelle Pehea is going to dance on your forehead. And then if he wanted to, he could replicate what another Pehea did very recently, though not related, and just go, because that's what's going to happen. Michelle Pehea is a dude, and to get this to stuff that actually matters other than just like karma and vengeance, Michelle Pehea feels like a problem in this division. And I so don't understand why more people aren't talking about this. It feels like he is a guy that when he was a crazy wild man, everybody was like, Michelle Pehea. And then he dials it back, as we talked about with Pantoja, reins it in, finds the happy medium, and people are like, he's not as fun. Right, but he's a better fighter. And he blew through his first 2 middleweight opponents in like a minute. And he's going to do it again on Saturday. And it's going to be, I think, 7 or 8 straight wins.
That'd be 8 straight wins.
Yeah. So that boy's going to be fighting a ranked opponent next time out. And he might blow through that guy because he is athletic. He is explosive. He is dynamic. This division is got some openings, and he's looking to just climb the ladder as quickly as possible.
And he definitely can. He definitely
100%.
Yeah. He is a highlight reel machine. He is a performance bonus machine.
He will get every opportunity to be out there every 3 months. Because he can make the weight now too, right? Like this is so much easier. Like you see him in there and we talk about it every time he fights. How did this dude make 170?
He's fucking massive.
He's gigantic. He hasn't lost any of the speed. He hasn't lost any of the power. You want to stand and trade with him? He can punch your face in. You want to go on the ground? He'll choke you out. This dude's a contender by the end of the year.
Yeah, for sure. Mentioning contenders at 185, we will pivot slightly to ex-light heavyweight Paul Craig, and we will move to 185. UFC Cannonball must be a contender, irrespective of however anything possibly happens in the entire world ever. Kaya Bahia. This is an interesting fight for me because both are pretty poor strikers, but both are pretty good grapplers. And I think that this is smart, very, very smart from the UFC, because Paul Craig and Kaya Bahia's grappling style is very similar. It's slow, it's concentric, it's controlled, it's suffocating, it's dominating. But Kaya Bahia is certainly less shot-worn than Paul Craig, has certainly taken far less damage than Paul Craig, but isn't in any danger of being brutally knocked out here, is Kaya Bahia. So can work, right? He can get very, very valuable cage time. This is the right placement on the card for him, opening up the main card in Brazil, in Rio, doing the whole thing, right? The music plays, and then Kaya Bahia walks out immediately afterwards. And so it's very, very, very smart management by the UFC. However, as Jamal Hill found out, sometimes in MMA, Paul Craig things happen. When you look at Paul Craig's record and it's got Jamal Hill and Magomed Ankalaev and these sorts of names on it, it's just for all of me, I am desperate.
It still doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
It won't ever. But Ankalaev is the like one that really stands out because it's literally the last second and tells you just how perpetually dangerous Paul Craig is and what that squeeze is like. So keep yourself as far away from it as possible.
I'm really interested to see how Kaya Bahia approaches this, to be honest.
Agreed.
Because we know that Paul Craig will pull.
Yep.
We know that Paul Craig will do whatever he can to get it to the ground. We know that Paul Craig has this ridiculous notion that he can get smashed in the face a couple of times just to get an overhook and find a triangle. But I'm very interested to see whether Kaya Bahia is confident enough to allow the fight to go wherever. And to allow the fight, if Paul Craig pulls, is he going to engage the guard? Is he going to force Paul Craig to stand up? Is he going to play this smartly? And again, this is something that's interesting about Kaya Bahia's character. How does the pressure of being the main card opener in Rio on a pay-per-view with Jose Aldo on it, with Alexandre Pantoja on it,
as a guy that feels like he has been kind of ordained for coming through Contender Series and 4-0 to start his UFC career,
yeah. How does that affect him? You know, because for sure, Paul Craig doesn't really give a shit. Like this is just another fight for Paul Craig. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. I hope that we do get to see some grappling, mostly because I am very interested to see how that actually goes. I'm very interested to see what the exchanges are like, but I have a feeling as though Kaya Bahia is going to do his best to keep this on the feet and just beat Paul Craig with athleticism and slightly more power and speed. Anything quickly to add?
No, I think that's 100%. And this to me, as I wrote about in the Fight by Fight preview, this is where we find out whether Kaya Bahia is a guy that's legitimately ascending, somebody that has real upside in this division. Is he kind of static for a little bit? Does he need to get through this one and then we'll still see because how this one plays out? Or is he somebody that so far has done well against the matchups he's had, but isn't going to progress beyond this point? I don't know what the answer is to any of them. I haven't been particularly high on him, but we'll find out on Saturday. All the things you said are 100%. This is well put together. Placement is perfect. Give the guy that you think has some upside a shot, showcase him, And now we see what happens.
Well, the next two competitors are neither high, but one of them is fucking wide, and that is Fire Hydrant Joanderson Brito. He is taking on Jack Shaw. Jack Shaw returning after his first professional MMA loss. This one is
sir. Got to win a featherweight last year in London.
Yeah, this is. Oh yeah, so you're absolutely right.
Came back and beat Makwan Amarkani.
Yeah, so he did. I am both perpetually worried and intrigued in equal measures in this specific matchup. Joanderson Brito is, as we would call him, a brick shithouse. Hits very, very hard, very, very good athlete, seemingly a good gas tank, can take a shot, can grapple a little piece. When he gets chokes, he puts them on and finishes them very, very, very swiftly. I don't know what Jack Shaw is going to show here that is going to change my opinion that athleticism is a very, very real thing. And when you have it in spades and another athlete does not, there needs to be a dramatic skill gap in order to close that position. And it just doesn't feel. Jack Shaw, make no mistake, is a very, very, very technically proficient, very, very skilled fighter, very, very solid grappler, very, very solid striker. But there are giant holes in the athleticism game that Joanderson Brito is going to fill with all sorts of vigor. We saw against Ricky Simon that there's sort of a top level. If we go fighter for fighter, skill for skill, I think even in the fight, it was obvious that Jack Shaw was the supreme technician. But this is MMA, lads. It's not just your technical ability. It is everything that surrounds it. And it feels like a very tough matchup for Jack Shaw to roll into. And I do understand that at 145, there just isn't any easy matchups, really, especially not when you are the name of Jack Shaw with the history of Jack Shaw. It is very, very difficult to just drop him into a gimme fight, right? You're not going to put him against William Gomis or a Gene Silver, as we may see further down the card. This is the type of fight that he is going to be contending at this 145-pound division. Do you echo my sentiments that this is a tough fight for Jack Shaw?
Yeah, 100%. This feels like the featherweight version of the Ricky Simon fight. That's the easiest way for me to think about it. Joanderson Brito can make some mistakes. We saw that in his promotional debut against Bill Algeo. Bill Algeo just said, okay, I know what this guy does. I'm going to do these things, and he's not going to be able to get me, and I'm going to beat him. And everybody since then has been finished because Joanderson Brito is a tremendous athlete with great finishing instincts and can do a lot of good things. He was very much losing the fight against Jonathan Pierce, got egged on, and was like, cool, you left your neck open. It's mine now. I'm going to go home. I love Tank. I think he's a great fighter. He is somebody I've really enjoyed watching throughout his career, through Cage Warriors, through into UFC. I thought he was criminally underrated for the longest time as an undefeated, really technical, was getting finishes, was getting good wins. There's just a ceiling. There's just a plateau because of that athleticism. You can't, to be able to technical a guy, out technique a guy, and be a real serious contender just as a technician, as you said, it has to be so much better than everybody else. I think of a guy like Damian Maia, right? Not a guy you think of as an athlete,
Perfect.
but goddamn, he knows I just got to get my hands on you. And then I've got the strength and the physicality, and I'll just work my way to it. And when we're in space, I'm going to struggle a little bit. And we can have fights like I had with Masvidal, right? Where it's a tale of two fights. We're in space, it's all game bred. We're in tight and we're grappling, it's all Maia. You have to be that good. Damian Maia might be the best grappler we've ever seen in the UFC in terms of MMA grappling. If you're not that, it gets really hard, especially against young, hungry, physical, on a nice run, fighting at home for the first time in the UFC. I will be supremely impressed if Jack Shaw goes out and wins. I don't favor him to. I think he can have a very good career going forward, but this is sort of where it feels like the line of demarcation is drawn.
Yeah, at least in these specific matchups. And you know, we could work out a path for Jack Shaw at 145 to get him into other ranked positions, but you're going to run up against somebody with the level of athleticism of somebody like a Anderson Brito at some point. Now, make no mistake, Jack Shaw could go out and he could find one takedown, and that's all he needs. We have seen it before.
Yep.
And I would not be shocked at all if he wrist rode Anderson Brito and rode his hips and forced him into back body lock exchanges and dragged him back down and made it ugly and tired Anderson Brito out and forced some of that lactic acid to fill up in those arms and in those legs. And then the rounds get easier as they go on. I could absolutely foresee that being a thing. However, he has to get there, and he has to get there without leaving his neck open. We saw in the Ricky Simon fight, there was a tight guillotine. It wasn't the Ricky Simon fight. It was the Timur Valiev fight. There was a tight guillotine. We saw in the Ricky Simon fight what happens when he takes a shot with big power. Anderson Brito has big power. Now, the other element of this, right, is we haven't seen Jack Shaw fill out at 145. There are certainly progressions in athleticism that you can find as you are not just spending all of your time in camp cutting weight. And by the way, fuck weight cutting. Do I think it's going to be demonstrable in this fight? I just don't know, but I do heavily favor Anderson Brito in this specific matchup.
Jonathan Pierce logged 6 minutes plus of control time on the ground against Anderson Brito. Jack Shaw could do that, as you said.
100%
could happen.
Karolina Kowalkiewicz walks on into Rio against Yasmin Lucindo. I'm going to hand this straight over to you. What do you think?
I'm really excited for Karolina Kowalkiewicz to be on this nice little run that she's on. She is a lovely woman. It was hard to see her on that big, long losing streak where she was questioning herself and her future and all of those things. I think she has settled into sort of a Jim Miller phase of life here in this division where she's not facing contenders. She's just wanting to compete, and she has done well with it. This is very much a let's see what we have in Yasmin Lucindo, who is 22 years old and coming off 2 straight wins. I lean very heavily to the veteran. I think Yasmin Lucindo has looked good against very suspect fighters who either currently are not in or should not be in the UFC. And I don't say that, as always, I don't say that disrespectfully. It's another one of those things we need to be contextual about. Not everybody deserves to be here. I think this is where we kind of see that she's 22 and has a bunch of stuff she still needs to learn because she's facing a former title challenger that is in really good form right now.
I feel like the Yasmin Uruguay performance is the one that I look to. Yasmin Uruguay, again, not an amazing fight, not a world beater, at least not at this stage of her young career, but that is the blueprint. You stay long, you hit heavy, and you keep it fucking stepping.
My dog has decided to pull on cords in my office, so I'm going to need a minute.
No problem.
Yeah, it's absolutely that's the right fight to look at. No disrespect to Brogan Walker and Polyana Viana. They're just not quite at this level. Karolina Kowalkiewicz knows what to do in there. And I think you see, not just when you look at the Yasmin Lucindo fight, the Yasmin Haragui fight for Lucindo, but what Haragui has done since, how it's gone for her since. And that to me helps provide a reflection of where Lucindo is, what she needs to improve on, how she's had this success, and what's to come on Saturday. Karolina Kowalkiewicz is just like, let's just call it as it is. She's a far superior, far more skilled, far more experienced competitor, and should, in theory, go out and win this fight relatively handily. Things can happen. Father Time waits for no one, comes at unexpected moments at times. We shall see.
We'll move over to what's potentially fight of the night in a matchup between Elvis Brenner and Muktigabek Arolbai. I almost got that name, but it's fine. We're going to go with it. Elvis Brenner 3-0 in the UFC, Oral By 1-0 in the UFC, late replacement for Oral By, and he snatches up a neck in either the first or the second round of that performance. Elvis Brenner has just been in absolute fucking steamrolling, debilitating, brain damaging, horrendous wars for all three of his UFC performances. Most notably, he dyed his hair blonde and dyed it again in one of those fights, and turned out to be Davison Figueiredo 2.0 with that nice red old strip going through his hair. Do you think it's safe to say that we're looking at potential fight of the night here?
Absolutely. Absolutely adore this fight. Elvis Brenner 3-0 last year. The win over Guram Kutateladze, right? Comeback city. He's down early. He's getting beat up. He's cut up. He's bloody. The hair's streaked. Looks like Ric Flair in there from the old NWA days. Gets the win, then goes to Sao Paulo and just crushes Kanan Krzyzewski in the first round and gets him out of there in a hurry. He's a guy that I think there should be a little bit more anticipation for seeing what's next. Like sophomore year, let's just see. And Oral By looked great on short notice up a division against Uros Medic and just said, look, I'm going to come out. I'm going to wrestle. You like to strike. I don't need to get kicked in the face. I don't need to get punched in the face. We're going to wrestle. And it wasn't even a rear naked choke. He just cranked his neck off. I mean, sign me that. And now he goes down a division. Sign me the hell up. Like this is the one to me that if you put this, and I understand why it's not the last fight of the prelims, but if you put it as the last fight of the prelims, as the like, let's get ready for the big stuff, it's going to send us in on great form. Like it could be the main card opener. And I would be like, yep, I get it. This is fireworks.
I couldn't agree more. I am a big fan of Elvis Brenner. I'm pretty sure the spotlight has shone on Elvis Brenner once before for good reason. And I would not be shocked. And I mean, look, I'll say it here, and I shouldn't say it because I shouldn't have these preconceived notions. If Jose Aldo goes out and wins, there's only one person that's getting a spotlight, and it's Jose Aldo, right? If we wake up...
Fair play.
If we wake up on Sunday morning and Jose Aldo has a loss next to his name and I'm sad, then there's the likelihood I won't write about Jose Aldo. But here we are. I'm just going to run through the rest of the fights, and then we're going to pick out a couple of fights each that we're interested in. Because you have Gene Silva facing off against William Gomes. I'm a big fan of William Gomes, big fan of William Gomes. Joaquim Silva versus Draco Close is a good fight. Mauricio Hufi versus Jamie Malarkey is a weird fight to me, and I'll let you talk about that one. Dione Barbosa versus Ernesto. I'm not even going to begin to try and pronounce that lady's name, as it would be disrespectful for me to just butcher it. Have you got that?
Karatkara.
Sure, that's that one. Ishmael Bonfim, Vince Pichel is a fantastic fight. And then we open with a curtain jerker of Alessandro Costa versus Kevin Borjas. Can you pick two fights that you would like to talk about out of that little grip of fights there, sir?
I mean, I will start with Gene Silva and William Gomes. You are a big fan of William Gomes. I'm very interested. 3-0 in the UFC. The only people he's lost to are Morgan Charrier and Saladin Parnasse. If you don't know who those gentlemen are, they were, for the longest time, in Saladin's case, still is, amongst the best featherweights outside of the UFC. And he lost to them very early in his career when he was an even younger man than he is now. Let me just keep seeing more. This is another one of those fighters where there's a whole whack of people that are like, don't know who this guy is. I have no idea who he is. You could tell me he's had 3 fights in the UFC, and that's a complete surprise to them. Fine. You need to pay more attention because this dude's good and we're going to see more of him. And Gene Silva is a bit of a crazy person. It's a little bit of he reps the fighting nerds, but he's also a little bit of the like, he feels like, do you know how every like group has the one wild card? He feels like probably the wild card of that group. The rest of them are Kyle Bahayo and Bruno Brazil, and they all seem pretty low key, and they go out and he's the guy that's trying to start trouble, is my guess. Looked great in his debut. This is a good test for William Gomes. He goes to Brazil. He had a couple of fights in Paris where he got to be the hometown guy. Now he's got to go on the road. Love it. Love that fight.
I think watching both men, the question is, can Gene Silva solve the puzzle?
Yep.
The puzzle of William Gomis, again, for the people that may not know William Gomis, is he fights willingly behind that back tram line. He fights on the back foot. He is a counter striker. He is long, he is rangy, and he is comfortable in doing so. He is slick. He is pretty in doing so. It is very, very difficult to find a way to cut the cage off with somebody like William Gomis, who's always one step ahead in terms of his footwork, in terms of his angles, in terms of his level changes, in terms of his feint games, in terms of the kicks, in terms of everything else. And so is Gene Silva able to begin to break down those barriers? We're going to find out. But that specifically is a question I have for one Gene Silva. Your next fight, sir.
My next fight is the opener, and it's because I am very interested in seeing more of Alessandro Costa. Kevin Borjas looked perfectly adequate in his Contender Series fight, deserved his contract, looked good last year getting it. He was fine in his debut. I believe he lost a split decision maybe to Joshua Van, who you and I are both very high on, think highly of, good fighter. But this for me is about Costa, who trains with the Lobo Gym crew, Brazilian Warriors, Diego Lopez, and that group. He debuted on short notice against Amir Albazi, lost that fight. Fine, these things happen. It's Amir Albazi. Then he won his next fight against Jimmy Flick, looked very, very good. Then lost to the guy headlining Steve Erceg. So it's really kind of hard to be like, he's 1-2, right? But he's 1-2 against the guy that could end Saturday as the world champion, and a guy that, if he were healthy, is probably fighting for the title. And so let me just get more looks, because the things I know is that the guy that's going to be, one of the guys that's going to be in his corner, Diego Lopez, is an absolute lunatic that is on a phenomenal run, and he speaks highly of this dude. And that gym as a whole, I think highly of Pancho Grasso, who will be in his corner as well. He's now not fighting a world champion. So let me see. Let me keep getting these reads. This is what I talked about at the start with the card last week. It's another one of the pieces that I look at for every card, right? Who can I get more info on? Who do I need more info on? Who do I want more exposure to that I'm going to find out more of where they fit? Costa fits that bill. I thought he should have gotten a contract off of his Contender Series win, just because he's a young enough guy in a division that needs fresh, new, more. We need to fill it out. Got there nonetheless. Fought Amir Albazi pretty well for 2 rounds, right? Gave him some trouble, throws some smoke, has some hands, and then, understandably, lost to a top 5 fighter. Okay. The fight with Steve Erceg was 29-28 across the board. Had some moments where he looked really good. Took him down a couple times. But again, short notice. Full camp in Brazil against a guy that isn't in the title picture. Sign me up. Let me get more looks, because I think it's going to be really, really good. And I think he is somebody that fits closer to the 10 to 15 range than where he is right now.
The fight I'm going to pick from the prelims is Ismael Bonfim versus Vince Pichel.
Love it.
The reason I'm going to pick this is, again, for Ismael Bonfim, comes in off the Contender Series and looks, again, perfectly adequate. Then fucking decimates Terrence McKinney with just an absolute screamer of a flying knee. He then goes out and loses to Benoit Saint-Denis. Now, I think that loss has aged very, very, very admirably. When you are Benoit Saint-Denis and you put together the run you put together, and you're only stopped by one guy that we are, a bona fide legend of 155 pounds, Mr. Dustin the Diamond Poirier, these things fucking happen in MMA. I'm interested that Vince Pichel took the fight again, given that they were scheduled to fight not so long ago, and Bonfim missed weight. I clearly, that to me says a signal of intent from Pichel. Is that because he can't get another fight? Is that because he thinks he has Bonfim's number? Is it because he thinks there are holes in Bonfim's game that he can come into Brazil, pick up a big win? We're going to find out. But I like Vince Pichel. He's well put together. He's long. He fights hard. He's got really nice straight shots. He can definitely do a bit of the grappling. Got some unorthodox options in the grappling areas. And I think if there is an Achilles heel to Ishmael Bonfim, it is the grappling. Has he had time since it's been almost a year, just shy of a year between the time that he lost to Benoit Saint-Denis and now? Does that mean that he's began to and started to close out some of those holes in that grappling game? I just think it's a really, really interesting fight. If it stays standing, I apologize, then it's going to be fireworks. Ishmael Bonfim is good on the feet, hits hard. Vince Pichel also good on the feet, veteran in his own right. And I really like this fight. I think it's a really, really solid fight. And again, if we think about how this is sort of building as the card goes, Alessandro Costa, really good prospect. If he goes out and trucks Kevin Borjas, that's a good start. Ishmael Bonfim, if we see something wild from frankly either of them, but obviously from Bonfim, that's great. Then we're going to take maybe a slight dip with the next couple of fights. I don't think Joaquim Silva versus Draco Close is going to be a war. It's likely going to be grapple heavy from close. Mauricio Hufi versus Jamie Malarkey. Malarkey, it depends on who turns up, right? And then we're rolling into the Gene Silvers.
Then we're getting into it. Yep.
Then we're getting into it, right? Gene Silva, if he is a madman and he puts Gomes away or makes it hard for Gomes, fantastic. If not, Gomes is going to win a decision. And then we're really ramping, right? Really, really ramping. So I think the UFC have done a good job in terms of starting with some strong fights and really pushing people up into those sort of adrenaline filled. Maybe they go and get a beer or they go and get some whatever in between the fights that are slightly underneath what they would expect from an adrenaline perspective. And then we're just running away with the fairies, right? Like just absolutely running away with them. Any final thoughts on this card? Anticipation levels? What are we thinking?
Pretty high, pretty solid. As I said, I love a international pay-per-view. I think we get a different kind of crowd. I think Brazil is an X factor in this entire event in so many ways. And it's so cool to see events down there in terms of just the vibe from the start of the night. It's going to be electric. There's a bunch of people that I'm interested in seeing just to get those additional reads. As I said, with Alessandro Costa, there's a bunch of fights that I just really like. Elvis Brenner, that fight, Joe Anderson, Brito, Jack Shore, and then on to the main card where it's just, if not a chance to answer some questions about somebody like the Caio Borralho fight, as we talked about, then it's seeing Michel Pereira again and getting, to me, I think, some more affirmation that this dude is a threat in the division. And then we close out with Jose Aldo. It's, I mean, guaranteed going to be happy when I hear the song kick in. Just want to see how it is when we're done. But as long as it's not vicious and ugly and bad, I'm going to be happy to see the guy get the moment that he deserves at home. And then we get a title fight between a champion that I really like and a challenger that I think is better than a lot of people understand. And so it's a great way to spend a Saturday night for me.
And that, I hope, was a great way for everyone listening and watching this to spend the best part of an hour. If you are watching, you will see that Huxley is done for the evening. And that is going to also wrap us up for this card. I personally I'm quite excited for this one. I think, as you say, and you touched on this at the very start, and I couldn't agree more, international pay-per-views just have an extra something to them, whether that's because those international audiences may only see the UFC banner once or twice a year, sometimes not even that. Those cards are generally extra special. Like, I'm really, really looking forward to, just completely off topic, that the UFC are not going to London this year. Maybe they will in the latter half of the year, but I'm really excited to see them take it to a different location. That certainly means that there'll be a different demographic of people that will be there. And so I really, really appreciate that as an offering to the UK market. I think it's something that will be it will show on Fight Night. Now, of course, there are things about timings and this and that and the next thing, but I was there in person for Bisping Dan Henderson too, and I can tell you that at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, it was still fucking rocking, right? So make no mistake, those fans will be there. They'll be there in droves, and I'm sure it'll be a great night altogether. I think the same thing for Brazil. That top two headline could carry any card in Brazil straight all the way from the start to the end. Sorry. And so, yeah, anticipation levels are high for me, and I am looking forward to watching it back. Before we round this out, sir, can you tell everyone where they can get hold of you? What sort of outlets do you work for? Where can they find you on the Instagrams and the X's and these sorts of things?
You can find me on the socials at Spencer Kite. I work for UFC.com, Sportsnet, Fighters Only, and OSDB Sports. I write exclusively about MMA. I love this. I breathe this. I eat this. I sleep this. I drink this. I talk about this nonstop, much to the sometimes frustration of my wife. But thankfully, I have friends like you that occasionally invite me on shows and are available for voice notes over WhatsApp at odd hours all the time to talk about fights. And this has been an absolute joy.
Thank you very much to yourself, Sir Spencer. Thank you to everyone that is listening. Please feel